Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ed Smith with Universal Digest, and I am happy to be with my colleague and friend Dave Emmons, who is writing his second book, and he wants to talk about it today before it does get published. And it's on some subject matter that I think is on everyone's minds right now, and it's like the current war in Ukraine by Russia, as well as the historical perspective that Dave is going to give to, because he is a veteran of the Vietnam War and was actually a war hero over there and ran his own platoon. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to the esteemed Dave Emmons, talk show host.
Well, thank you, Ed, for that Vietnam hero, I guess, label. But I never got that label. But uh, it didn't matter to me at the time. I was young and I was brave, and like when you're young, you just do things and you don't pay any attention to getting awarded anything. So if I didn't get the medal pinned on me by my commander, I accept that's part of my duty. Okay, what we want to do is
If I might add, if my friend, I apologize, so people will get a better picture of what happened. You actually had a lieutenant running the platoon at the time, and he bugged out. He got afraid or something and took off. No one ever found him again. And for over a year, you were left to run that platoon by yourself. And you were quite successful. I believe you only lost one or two soldiers.
Mhm.
That's quite impressive, because how often were you attacked?
Yeah, probably every night, some kind of rocket or mortar attack or something like that from the VC and the guerrilla fighters. They would always come up, around the perimeter. Yeah, but yeah, the lieutenant, he did run when times got hard and we were being hit really hard. I had to call in artillery, and I was never trained for artillery. I was just basically trained actually for infantry real quick when I was in Vietnam. That wasn't my MOS or my duty, but I ended up doing it, and I guess it was part of what I had to do, so I did it. I had a platoon of 42 guys. The captain told the lieutenants to leave me alone, so I guess I was practicing as a lieutenant. But at the end of the war, not at the end of the war, but at the end of my duty with the military for 3 years, I was offered a commission. And I told the colonel, I said, well, I've been working that position for some time. I should get back pay. No, I didn't tell him that. He'd probably say, get the hell out of this office. That's the way it is. But okay, let's get down to basics now. I'm Dave Emmons, and then we got Ed Smith. He's the co-host and producer of the show. I'm the host, and you might have seen me on DNN, Disclosure News Network, and Rob Adams, he's a producer on that show. And stay with us on that. Stay with the followers. We have a couple of thousand followers, and I appreciate that from everybody who follows us. But I would like to give a shout out for a Disclosure News Network that we do have. We still have some videos that are playing back on that show. But our producer, Rob, he's been a little bit under the weather, and he's fighting a health issue battle. So I pray for him, and he's a good friend, a nice guy. So I want to give him a shout out. I want to give the artist a shout out that's helped me with the book, Olaf Rockner from Sweden. He's a really good artist, and if you buy my book, this ET book that's coming out in a week or two, and my publishers are Hanger One Publishing, and it's Doug and Alex Hajicek. And those two are wonderful guys, editors, producers. The father, Doug, he's the one who produces Monster Quest and other history shows and that type of thing. So they're all in for this, and they're doing a good job of my book. It'll be released soon. My experiences all throughout my life with ET and UFOs, it'll be in that book, and it'll be something that we'll talk about maybe later. But I'm working on another book, and it's a timely thing. I'm working on the useless, senseless wars that the Americans have been involved with. And like I said, this is the Dave and Ed show, and we're doing it on Universal Digest. On Ed's the editor of Universal Digest, and we're doing it on his show instead of DNN. So we're kind of crossing over for here for now, and probably this could be a permanent type of show that we might be putting on. We enjoy you being with us, and I will start off with, and everybody has got a little history lesson here, the Civil War. Even Lincoln, if you saw that documentary here lately, the people in 1861, before the Civil War actually started, just a few months before, the people were protesting. Actually, that was one of the first protests, I guess, in America. They were protesting in New York and up in New England and those areas about Lincoln going to war. Well, Lincoln did not want to go to war. He wanted to wait for the Southerners, the South, to start the war. He said, if they start firing on us, then I'll have to go to war. So what happened, I guess just maybe weeks later, they fired on Fort Sumter. So Lincoln told his generals, I guess need to go to war. So that's when it all started. He didn't want to, the people didn't want to, but then when the people found out that there was cause and reason for the war, they went ahead and said, okay, we're behind you, Mr. Lincoln. Let's go for it and get this thing done. So they thought it was going to be a kind of a quick war too, because they didn't think the South was prepared. But that's kind of like today with Ukraine. The people in the North didn't think the South were really prepared for a long, drawn-out battle. They didn't really have the regiments they thought they weren't organized as a real military. So they thought they'd walk through this cakewalk, just like Putin did with Ukraine. Okay, so that is the first protest. World War I is a necessity war, I call it, because if they would have won, if the Germans would have won, their allies would have come to our shores, and we would have had to fight them. So that was a necessity war. The Lusitania ship was sank, and the president, Woodrow Wilson, said, okay, and this is in 1917, okay, we're going to enter the war, and we're going to help out the English and the French. So that happened. World War II was another war that was necessary. Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941. Franklin Delano Roosevelt talked with Winston Churchill several times, and Winston Churchill begged him to get involved in the war. Just like today, we got Zelensky from Ukraine asking everybody to help out, get involved in the war. Well, actually, he did a speech in Parliament, UK, yesterday, Zelensky, and he sounded just like Churchill. And he made a speech kind of like Churchill. And so all the people in the Parliament give him a standing ovation. That was support, but we're not giving him the right support that he really needs. This isn't over with. We'll talk about that later in the show, but a little bit of real quick history here. World War II was a necessity war from 1941 to 1945. And yes, we lost a lot of soldiers. We're talking in the hundreds of thousands, and a lot of people died in Europe over the bombings. And that was a war of necessity, and everybody accepted it. We didn't have any protest on that war as we were going, because people were chipping in, working in factories. The women would give up their aprons and run into a factory and start building these tanks and munitions and things of that nature. They were very fired up, and they got into that war. Now comes the Vietnam War. This is the war that I'm familiar with, and I can show you a little bit with the little hat trick here that I wear that occasionally. And actually, it's a 4th Infantry Division in Vietnam, and I'm a veteran. And I have to say, I'm not really proud of the Vietnam War at all. And I have my reasons, and I'll be reading those off to you here. But it was a war that wasn't necessary. And they say we lost the war, but we really didn't lose the war. I was there in 1969 and 1970, but the war they started in 1965. The war actually started a couple of years before that. They had military advisors and trainers there in 1962 and 3. And then Johnson, who wanted the war, he was actually pushing for the war. Kennedy wasn't. He didn't really want to get that involved in the war, but he died. It was kind of strange. Coincidence, right? Johnson took over, and in 1965, Johnson sent 50,000 troops into Vietnam, South Vietnam, and these guys were assisting the South Vietnamese soldiers, and they were fighting alongside them. Our soldiers were. So we got in the war, and then before you know it, a year later, there's another 50,000, then another 100,000. By 1968, we had something like 200,000 maybe plus soldiers, support troops and everything else there. And I was there in 69 and 70. So yes, there's a lot of soldiers there then. we lost over 58,400 soldiers. And there has been, I guess they're talking about 3 million people that died in that war. Half of them were civilians. Civilians from North Vietnam from the bombings. I think it was 65,000 people died in the North. And also there was I guess a lot of people in the South died, and they blamed us. They called us U.S. soldiers baby killers. They protested against us. They had signs at airports when we'd land, and that's why the military decided, okay, we'll bring these guys in at different times of the night, so the protesters won't be there, so they won't be able to protest against us when we walk out of the airports or whatever. The airports didn't want the trouble either, so that was a shame. It was actually, we come back in shame, hanging our heads down, Vietnam veterans, in which I think the Afghanistan people and the Iraqi soldiers, they hung their heads up high, and I was so proud of that. I was so glad that finally, soldiers are getting respect. We didn't get any respect for Vietnam. Of course, we went on to lose that war. In 1968, there was a general. He was a chief of staff, and he has actually written a book in 1985, How We Won the War. And it was because they were about ready to surrender because we beat them in Tet. The Tet season, we beat them then. That was their big push. After that, the generals and their chief of staff in the North, they were kind of fed up. They said, okay, we're not going to win this war. So they were about ready to surrender. But their intelligence people, what they told them, they said, no, don't surrender. We know the American people. They're rising up now and protesting. Even John Kerry, the famous Democrat, he was involved with a veterans group that was anti-war. At the time, I didn't like that. While I was in Vietnam, most of us soldiers said, no, we don't like that. We don't like these protesters. Get them off the streets. We're doing our jobs here. We're doing our duty. But actually, the people were right in the long run. When I got home and got away from the war, I could see that. But for John Kerry to do that while the war was going, and we should have the intelligence also to know that these people are about ready to surrender. 68. And then in 69, they were about ready to surrender if we would have bombed them 2 more weeks. This famous general, and I had his name, and I got his name. I don't have it in the notes, but I'll bring that up probably a little later. But this famous general, he was the chief of staff of North Vietnam. He said twice they were about ready to surrender and give up. But then the people here in the U.S., and they paid attention to John Kerry's movement quite a bit, and all they said, their intelligence said, okay, General, all we got to do is just keep fighting. We can go around the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Cambodia, come in, do our little skirmishes and conflicts, keep the war going, keep pestering the soldiers of the U.S., and then that way, the people will have them pull out, and when they have them pull out, then we're going to win. Then we'll go into the South and just rush over things. And there was one scene in a movie, Full Metal Jacket, that I got a kick out of, and I finally picked up on it. There was a couple of guys talking on the street, and there were some prostitutes walking by, and they said, "Hey, I've got some guns that I can trade, for any services." And she said, "What is that?" He said, "I've got a gun it's brand new, and it's only been dropped once." And I finally got a hold of that. It was the South Vietnamese soldiers got scared and they dropped their weapons and ran. So I finally caught that one.
Oh my gosh! I caught it immediately.
Yeah, I after listening to it the second time, seeing it, I finally caught that.
Not Dutch cover. It's called Drop and Run.
Yeah, right. So the war went on, and in 1973. We signed an armistice, a peace treaty, and we started pulling out. It took us about a year and a half to start to keep pulling out. In 1975, the war was actually over, and
I apologize.
We were pulling out in by 1975. We were getting our last troops out, and I believe it was in May or April of 1975. We made the final push to get back to Saigon and get all of our people there. And the North Vietnamese soldiers were making their move. They were charging. They were charging down to the south. And then the South Vietnamese soldiers refused, got scared. They wouldn't fight anymore. They ran. And that caused them to come into Saigon a lot quicker than we thought.
Right.
It was a plan that didn't work because the South Vietnamese army did not put up a fight. During those years, though, that they were fighting with us, they lost quite a few, and they're involved in that 3 million people that I just talked about that died in South and North Vietnam. It was kind of a war like. You find out all these things that the generals in the North was saying that they would have surrendered. That kind of makes me feel I shouldn't even went to Vietnam. I went there in 1969, and it should have been over in 68 after the Tet. They should have surrendered. But if it wasn't for people like John Kerry, I'll mention his name again. He turned out to be a Democrat senator after years went by, and I guess I don't know if he has any bad thoughts or feelings about what he did after he found out this general, the chief of staff, said that they were going to surrender. And you can get this book, look it up on the internet. Chief of Staff General, I can't think of his last name because it was really a hard name to remember, but it was How We Won the War, and it was written in 1985. Look it up, or you can look up that information and it'll tell you.
For you, Dave.
Yeah. What's that?
Let me pull this up for a moment. You sent me the documentation when you and I were preparing and talking about this.
Yeah, it's in my book. Yes,
I can give you that name for you, the general. Let's see here. Please continue talking, and I'll find it here in just a second.
The story is in my book. I'm 2/3 the way done. It's a book about the useless, senseless wars that we got ourselves involved in, police actions, and a lot of money spent, a lot of blood lost on our side, and a lot of blood lost on the enemy side too. And it's a shame that both have to die like that in useless wars. And you look at these countries now, like Vietnam. Now they're a big trading country, and they're built up modern. I wouldn't even recognize the country if I went there now. Ho Chi Minh City is now, it used to be Saigon, now it's Ho Chi Minh City. So
I agree. The general that you're speaking of is General Giap.
Yeah, Giap.
Commander-in-Chief of the North Vietnamese Army, that published in 1985. Thank you.
Yeah, I got it in my book, and I can't go through all my book material to look it up. I didn't have it on my notes, but
I got your file, brother.
You pulled me out. Okay, that's great, but it's covered in my book, and like I said, it's 2/3 the way done. I'm not sure who the publisher is going to be with that book, but the publisher I got with the UFO ET experiences is a Hangar One Publishing, and with Doug and Alex had to check. So look for that book in about a week or two. We'll probably have a show and talk about that. But right now, this war thing has gotten to me because I thought myself, Vietnam, I thought, okay, I'll write a book about Vietnam. But then when I said that Vietnam War was a senseless war with 58,400 people dying, and you got 9,000 suicides out of that war so far, that's been over the years, last 30, 40 years, whatever. But that is a total waste because now the whole country is communist, and that's what we tried to stop. And it seems like every time we go into a country, we try to tell people how to run their governments. They don't want to. I talked to the people in Vietnam when I was there. I asked the villagers and the farmers, I said, do you mind who governs your country? And they say no. They said, as long as we can farm and do our rice, said, we're fine. I said, wow. I talked to a lot of them, and they said the same thing. They didn't care that we were there. They were there working with us, making money because they were a little prosperous. They made a few bucks working for us. But then those people on this disastrous pullout, Saigon, 1975, people were hanging on helicopters just like they did in Afghanistan, hanging on the airplane, the same chaotic pullout. But this one in Saigon wasn't really calculated because we didn't think the South Vietnamese soldiers would run that fast or retreat that fast, and the North would come in so fast. They just come in with guns blazing. So people were running, trying to jump on helicopters, jump on boats to get out of there. And a lot of people were left there You seen it on CBS Night News. Walter Cronkite, he would show this scene: people hanging on helicopters and leaving, and people dropping in the water. Same thing. It's just like we just went through it. History repeats itself. But
It's
after
true.
that, 40,000 South Vietnamese people were killed by the enemy for working for us. They called them traitors, and some of them were soldiers, South Vietnamese soldiers, but a lot of them were civilians who worked with us in offices and also in cleaning and doing other odd jobs for us. And they were all killed because they supported us. Well, the VC were killing them anyway, all throughout the war. They'd go through the villages and shoot them and kill them. And then we'd have to have their bodies out on the road so the relatives can claim them. And we saw all that. But then, of course, the people wanted to call us baby killers. I think that was just something that was just pumped up. In war, a lot of people die, but back then we didn't have specialized targeting or GPS or anything. So our bombs were dumb. I mean, the bombs probably would hit a village every now and then, and that's what they call the casualties of war. Anyway, it's so it happens in every war.
And the first casualty of war is the truth.
Right, and yeah, it is the truth about it. And then after 1975, of course, the communists took over, and everything that we fought for was lost. Most of the veteran friends that I talk to, when people come up and I've had some people say, "Well, you lost the war," and I get a little upset because it said, "No, we did not lose it militarily. We lost it because the people," and they were playing politics. They had a Republican in office, Richard Nixon, there for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And what they were doing, the Democrats were playing politics with the war, and they were saying, we can get our soldiers out, let us Democrats do it. It turned into a political thing, just like it has been for the last 5 or 6 years. And it's actually it's political now. A lot of things going on. It's almost deja vu. So
it is.
Yeah. So, you look at all this stuff that happened in Vietnam, you think we'd learn our lesson? No.
Yeah.
In 1991, of course, we fought the Gulf War. We fought that for Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and those people because Saddam Hussein, he walked through those countries and took over the oil. So we couldn't allow that to happen. They were actually, I think, NATO partners with us, Saudi Arabia. So we went in 91. That was a war that was necessary, but that war didn't cost. But I mean, every life is essential, and every life is important. But they lost maybe 150 people during that war. In 91, the Gulf War, they call it.
Was that all?
Yeah, it was very, very low numbers. They didn't go all the way into the capital, or they didn't go all the way in to take Saddam Hussein out. They pushed all the soldiers back to their borders in Iraq, and they stopped there. They didn't go in.
Well, I remember essentially, and sorry to interrupt, but George Bush had told Saddam Hussein numerous times, do not, get out of Kuwait, because that's what they did. They had accused Kuwait of stealing their oil, and they were angle drilling in the desert underneath and tapping the oil supplies that were under technically the country of Iraq. But it was the 30th province or something that historically Hussein said that Kuwait was part of. So it's kind of similar to the imperialism of recreating the Soviet Union, and again, that Vladimir Putin wants to do. Mm-hmm. And history is repeating itself for sure. But I wanted to bring that part up.
I didn't know that about that drilling at the angle and going in. I didn't hear about that. But But Bush said, he didn't want to go any further with the war to go into Iraq at that point, because what happened is Saddam Hussein said, "Okay, I won't do it again. I've been a bad boy. I won't do it again." So Bush backed out. So they backed their soldiers out. But I guess what happened is there was a lot of terrorism that was fomenting in Iraq, a lot of Al Qaeda and Taliban and ISIS.
Mujahideen people too.
Right.
That Hussein had. So if I remember correctly.
Yeah, those were his.
But to let you know, part of my, UFO research on the book that I'm finishing up, I visited the Bentwaters Cold War Museum and learned a lot. And just to add to what you're saying, is one of the last acts that we performed was to send A-10 tank killers from England, from that region, and they were the ones who attacked the Iraqi troops leaving with their booty from Kuwait heading back to Iraq.
Mhm.
And it was, I don't think anyone survived. And it was really a slaughter. It was with the
Right.
18 tank killers. So
Yeah.
anyway, thank you. Mhm.
But as history goes on, buddy, that we keep getting involved. And what happened with Afghanistan was, the Taliban, bin Laden, and the whole group, they got together and they flew these airplanes into the Twin Towers, 9/11, 2001, and that was war. It was an act of war. And what Bush Jr. Did at the time, President Bush, and we went in and we went about a month later, we started flying missions into Afghanistan. And the Air Force actually, and then they sent a team of SEALs in there to pinpoint the targets. And the Air Force just really cleaned house there for about 2 weeks. Yeah, they just kind of really did a job on them. But they were actually looking for bin Laden. They never could find him. He was very elusive and running around everywhere. People were hiding him out. But I think at that point we should have kept bombing them and bombing them to submission like we can do without putting a whole lot of boots on the ground. But what we did, we put boots on the ground. We started increasing, the soldiers there. We got up, I think, to something like 50,000 soldiers in Afghanistan, probably plus if you count all the support people, and you have a lot of Navy SEALs there. They were doing all kinds of, and that's where they started getting their greatness. The SEALs are great fighters, and they send them in to do these types of jobs. And I just wonder if they do Ukraine for us. that could be something we could probably do. But what happened there in Afghanistan? It went from 2001 to 2021, and just this past August, and in Afghanistan, we were there for about 20 years. Both wars, we're talking Iraq and Afghanistan, cost us 2.5 trillion. Some number says $3 trillion we spent in that 20-year period fighting both wars. Of course, when we went in Iraq for the second time, it was for a reason that we never really found out. It was like mass destruction weapons.
WMD, yeah, weapons of mass
destruction.
destruction.
But they didn't find a trace of them. I think Saddam Hussein had a chance to hide them at that point.
I believe they did send some to Syria. If I remember correctly, the ordnance, or it was mostly gas warfare.
Right.
It was not anything except using that type of situation. So I think that got smuggled out of the country. But as far as what they were talking about, nuclear ordnance did not exist.
No. And I guess the investigators did find that they thought there was areas in bunkers where they stored these weapons, except they were removed. The WMDs were removed, but
Right.
that give President Bush Jr. that give him the excuse to go in to Iraq, and because Bush Jr. did not like Saddam Hussein. His whole family was threatened by Saddam Hussein. They did not like him.
Wow.
So it was a personal thing, vendetta that Bush Jr. wanted to get involved in. He got involved, and that was at shock and awe when they started bombing, the major cities and the military and the communication centers there in Iraq. When I saw that, I thought, is this war necessary? Why don't they just take out, Saddam Hussein? Just like bin Laden. Why didn't we just take them out and not get involved in a protracted war?
In some ways, they did. I had the pleasure of knowing the chief engineer at the time at General Dynamics, and they had developed the optics for the M1A1 tank. and they went up against the T-72s. And because it was cold part of the year in Iraq, the Iraqis had taken their tanks, excuse me, and buried them under the sand, but they were leaving heat signatures and they didn't think about that. Well, they gave the order with the American tanks, and they blew up, I think, something like 250 tanks in one time.
Mm.
And that was because they could see the Iraqi tanks, but the Iraqis could not see the U.S. tanks.
Right. With our technology, you would think that we would save a lot of lives. I guess we did. If you take a look at Vietnam, we lost 58,000, probably 100,000 wounded. We didn't have modern technology. But then you get to Afghanistan, in which they lost 2,400 soldiers in 20 years and $2.5 trillion. And in Iraq, they lost a total of 2,370 people in Iraq. And listen to this: contractors, the ones who go over there with the high tech material and they're building and doing things, contractors lost 3,917 people.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes, yes. And the Afghan military lost 69,000 in Afghanistan, and the civilians were 46,300 they lost in Afghanistan. So we're mixing the two wars here together. But in 06, bin Laden, his days were numbered, and they finally found him in a rat hole, and then they put him in the court in May 2011, and then soon after that he was hung by the neck. I think he was hung. I'm not sure. Yeah. So I'm not sure how he died. There was some controversy in how he did die, but they finally got him, bin Laden. Not bin Laden, but in 2011, let's go back to Afghanistan now. We're bouncing back and forth because both of these wars were happening at the same time.
Right.
Well, we were in Afghanistan in 2001 up to 2021. We were in Iraq from, I think, 2003 to, what was it, 2003 to, I think, 2011, somewhere like that. We was there 6-7 years. And over that period of time, we lost 2,370 guys in that. But the contractors and the civilians, like I told you, that was a true number. But also getting back to both of these wars, the losses of people, and you take a look at the countries now with Afghanistan back in August last year, it was just chaotic. And a lot of people said it reminded them of
That's very true.
It reminded them of, I got something pop up there. That's the thing about recording. You get things pop in and out every once in a while. Yeah, but no, that's with both these wars. You find that Afghanistan was in chaos when they left in August 2021. Biden kind of messed that one up. That should have been prepared 2 weeks or 3 weeks ahead of time. They should have left the Kabul was involved, but Kabul, they should have left the airport there so they can land jets. And that's what they were afraid of. The Taliban and the Al-Qaeda were afraid of our Air Force. So we should have left the contingency of our Air Force there to guard things until everybody was out. Instead, we didn't get a lot of people out. And then we had ISIS starting to farm up again in Afghanistan. They're the ones who did this terrorist bombing. And so they killed 13 soldiers and I think something like 200 civilians, Afghan civilians that were trying to get on a flight. But then the final flights went out and we left several hundred people there that had green cards and people that worked for us. I don't know how many of those people were actually killed by the Taliban. We know that they take retribution out on people who work with the U.S. So that was another war that was very bad. Even the Afghan soldiers who served there, they feel like us Vietnam veterans. They're thinking, what a waste. I did my service. I fought for my country, and what happens? It's a wasted situation where countries go back being as bad as they have. Vietnam went back being communist. Afghanistan went back to being Taliban ruled with ISIS building up. Iraq is running us out now. They don't even want us there in Iraq. They got 2 different or 3 different provisional governments going on at the same time. They're trying to get along. There hasn't been any civil war that's breaking out there, but there is a little bit of political strife in Iraq. But they want us out. After we build them back up and after we give them all the money to build back up, and we helped them out militarily, and we lost those lives. So Iraq is back to being what they want to be. So we didn't make a change at all. None of the countries.
Um, that's acceptable. Yes, I mean, and as you mentioned earlier, in closing, that we're looking at another war, excuse me, that could essentially turn into World War III if it becomes multinational. Um, it's not really the thrust of this broadcast, but I did want to bring up too, I noticed something a bit unusual, and that was that the soldiers in this recent ceasefire, I think the Russians were probably running pretty much out of ammunition. So it was a good time to call a ceasefire so they can replenish themselves. But they're still using hardware that's from the 1960s. And I mentioned earlier the T-72 tanks in Iraq that Russia had sold them. That's what they're still using today. And I mean, this is antiquated hardware that they're going into the Ukraine with. And I found that to be quite interesting.
Maybe that's why the Ukrainian soldiers can hear them miles away, because they're rattling. They're rattling around the road and they're making noise.
Right. And, and I mentioned to you too that a friend that I know whose wife is from Russia, she claimed quite vehemently that Putin was hiring not just mercenaries but criminals from their prisons to fight as soldiers. And that's not the first time that has happened either. Right. But they're being stalled. There had been a history like with Chechnya with Russia. The Russians got their heads handed to them in Chechnya. Those people were tough.
Right.
And it looks like the Russians' ability to fight is rather diminished over what people thought it would be.
Mm-hmm. Talking a little bit political here, President Biden, I use that word name kind of loosely, but we have a staff in there now, and we're facing maybe possibly a third world war. Yes, and we got a group of people in the White House and his staff that don't know much about anything that's going on. And then you got Biden, who a lot of people already, even the Democrats, are saying he's not fit. 67% of the people say he's not fit. And here we got this war facing us. And Putin, the reason why he pulled this is because he knew Biden was weak in the White House, and how he pulled out of Afghanistan.
Right, exactly.
Total blunder, and the whole world watched it. And UK and all these other countries that were involved were really mad and pissed off at Biden for doing what he did. And he thought he was going to gain some political points by pulling us out of the war in Afghanistan. Sure, Trump had already started the pullout. He wanted to pull out people too, but he said he wouldn't have done it like Biden did. Right. Pull out all the soldiers first and then the civilians later. That doesn't work like that. Even little kids say you should have pulled out the civilians first, left the soldiers there to guard things.
And actually, it wasn't hundreds. We're calculating now it was thousands that were left behind. And I'm sure that there's retribution going on at this moment.
Right. We don't hear it because they close all that off. There's not much communications coming out of there. And of course, I don't think the Biden administration wants that news out anyway, because it makes Biden look worse and worse. But getting to Ukraine, it seems like history repeats itself.
Yes, again. Mm-hmm.
It just, we have these senseless wars and these people dying senselessly by a madman. Usually, I guess you can say, an evil person usually will start the wars a lot of times, or they perpetuate with their people.
Sticking with the facts, just the facts themselves, the logical base of what has happened is one thing. What will happen can be fairly well understood, as in the past with Hitler. A lot of the present warfare strategies are not much different, than what Germany had at World War II. And another thing too, I'm sure that Vladimir Putin had looked at the fact that when we went to Iraq, we blazed across the desert knowing full well we had to go full guns to get to Baghdad after landing in Kuwait, and they made it in record time to actually occupy the city. So that's not happening right now in the Ukraine. and you've got a motivated population that's been attacked again. It's not the first time they've been attacked by Russia, but this is a game changer because we're looking at Ukraine being pretty much the breadbasket for Europe.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of sub things going on that we'll find pretty recently that Vladimir Putin knows what he's doing. And I'm not, whether he's delusional or whatever, but I think he's already aware of this as well. Really, there's only two choices for him now. Number one, he's going to get assassinated, or number two, he'll be charged as a war criminal.
He's a loser either way. And that's why a lot of intelligence people are saying this could be a bad move because he could do something with nuclear bombs. He could be pushing those buttons because he doesn't have nothing to lose. His people are against him. The world is against him. And he's being called a pariah, a killer. So, wow.
Well, all we can do, my friend, and to our loyal viewers and all the people watching this broadcast, and we certainly appreciate it so much. But this is important information, not just from the historical standpoint that Dave has shared with us, but presently, I think the most we can do right now is let the powers to be do what the powers to be, and we'll pray for the Ukrainians, the Ukrainian people, the bravery of Zelensky, etc. And let's hope that this has a noble end, because if not, it's going to get really, really bad globally. Because we're a nation of nations, like 273 countries in the world. So we're still a lot of nationalism going on, but we're pretty much global in the supply chain, commerce, of transfer of material from one country to the other. And when that is disrupted, and even famine could start in Europe anytime if Ukraine doesn't return back to normal.
Right. And the gas prices that Biden says were created by this war in Ukraine, that's not true. The gas prices started going up because of his regulations. He tore up all of what President Trump had opened, the pipelines, the shale, and also the offshore drilling. He had that going. We were almost energy dependent. We were
net energy producing, exporting country of oil. And had the Keystone pipeline not been touched, we would not be experiencing in some areas of the country $6 and $7 a gallon for gas.
Right.
I thought that was only something I heard like in the UK. When I would travel there, I mean, they're paying like close to $9 American per gallon. Of course, they're using liters and things are different, but the equation to fix that is they're about $8.61 a gallon right now.
Yeah, and California, $6 and something. They're going up. Yeah.
The average day was $5.44 a gallon in California.
Really? I saw some signs that said $6. Maybe that was near Hollywood.
Some areas there are, like in San Francisco and LA County, they're the highest gasoline in California right now. And I think there was one station that was reported to have had close to $9 a gallon.
Oh, yeah.
And people that are traveling, anyone that's lived in LA knows, you don't just drive 2 or 3 miles to get somewhere. You may have to drive 50, 60 miles just in one day to go to and from work. How many people can afford gasoline and prices that have quadrupled? They went from $2 a gallon now to $7. It's
especially if they use travel as an occupation.
Yes.
With the Biden administration, what they're saying is we're going to have to suffer a little while when they put these sanctions against oil from Putin. But the problem of it is they were only providing 8 or 10% of the total crude to us, or whatever, and that's the drop in a bucket actually. And we can regain that back by producing ourselves. Why don't the Republicans stand up a little stronger than what they have been and say, hey, let's use our oil, please, here in the U.S. and be independent and lower drop the prices.
Yeah, they have tried in Congress, but they don't have the numbers right now to carry a majority vote, and that's what is unfortunate.
But I've seen Democrats, though, 4 of them actually control the whole Congress. So how do they do it and the Republicans can't do it? That But what about this book that I'm writing? There's more details in my book. I might have missed a couple of details here, but there's a lot more details in my book about these wars, the senseless wars, and the full title will be known before long. But once I get done with it, I'm a veteran. I've seen it. I've been there face to face with combat, and I've talked to people about it. I know my veteran buddies. They're not proud of losing the Vietnam War, and neither am I, but I'm proud of my service. All the veterans are proud of serving this country, and we should be. But actually, we need to ask more questions before we go into another war. Are we going to win? What's the purpose? Is it going to offend or do we have to defend our own borders to fight this war? If so, like in Germany and Japan, we had to fight them because they would be here if we didn't fight them over there. So that's the type of wars that we should be looking at. We shouldn't be getting into these policing things of countries, and even with Ukraine going on there, nobody knows what to do. I mean, I think there's might be certain people might know what to do, but they're going to take a chance of Putin pushing a button. And one intelligence agency guy said he might take and shoot one, small nuclear bomb and blow it up in the Black Sea, just to let people know, hey, this is a warning shot. But they're thinking that he could go further. And he's loose. He's a loose cannon.
Yes, he is. And all we can do on our level is to pray for everyone and just hope the old saying, prepare for the worst, but expect. Expect the worst, but now I'm missing it.
Yeah.
Prepare for the worst, prepare for the best, but expect the worst. And
right. And I think in Ukraine, Lelinski, he's a hero. I mean, he went from comedian to be a hero. Ukraine. So he's
Volodymyr Zelensky.
Yeah.
And people don't know from a historical standpoint, in talking to some of my Russian friends, like the last, when was it? 1967, I believe, there was another incursion, but the Russians made it law that the Ukrainians had to speak Russian. Now, the two languages are very similar in a lot of ways. In Ukrainian is a lot more O's and Y's and things like that. But actually, Vladimir Zelensky is known as Volodymyr Zelensky, if I'm getting that pronunciation correct.
Right, and he's Jewish, and they call him a Nazi. They call him a Nazi, and he's a Jewish guy, but one hell of a guy. But getting back to this book idea, reason why I wrote the book is because of the senseless wars, and I wanted a lot of the young people to hear about a little bit about the history and how many people we lose in wars and how much money we spend in these wars, and we don't gain anything. What do we gain? We're not even fighting for our own country. We're fighting for other countries in a police force. We shouldn't be doing that anymore. And I know a lot of people, we hope that this Ukraine deal, once it's settled, that maybe we'll be sick of wars and we'll be sick of people dying.
Well, I'm pretty sure everybody's sick of war, but there's motives behind it and why Putin wants to do what he's doing, and he wants more to coalesce a new, not just a Soviet Union, but an imperial Russia.
Right.
And that's always been his plan. That's his playbook. But how he gets there, frankly, a lot of what I'm observing right now is pretty slipshod and, half-baked. I mean, in using such old equipment as he has, and the air wars is surprising me a little bit too. How few planes Russians have sent over, because they have an incredible air force, and if they just used it, they could take over the whole country.
Yeah, but they've lost 10 over the weekend. Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, they lost 10 aircraft from these shoulder-held missiles and Stingers. And I think that's great. I think these Ukrainians are doing a great job, and they're fighting. They're really doing the best. But getting back to that, we talked about a story the other day, buddy. I talked to you about CBN had this story of Ukraine soldiers were on this road, guarding this road. They saw a column of Russian tanks and armored vehicles coming their way, and they thought, oh no, we're going to be overrun. We got all these, we're just a few people here, and they got all these tanks coming. But then one soldier, and then maybe there was two that caught it, there was a bright light in the sky, and he called it a spaceship or something, and had a bright white light that come down on these tanks and destroyed them. He said it destroyed all the tanks. And I thought, wow, what a story. And then I saw it on CBN. There's another, I saw the story again. I believe you sent me something on that too. So, yeah.
There's a lot of speculation going on about this. We know in some ways that we have pretty exotic equipment. How we got there is a matter of conjecture for some people to think that we back engineered alien spacecraft. And being that you and I are experiencers, we know we're not alone. But could it have been something exotic that we already had in our arsenal?
Yeah.
We don't know. So that being said, we're coming up to the end of our session. What else? And I didn't mean to step on your toes there, buddy, but what else would you add before we close?
That was the remark about the ETs and the bright light. That bright light could have been our heat wave ray that we have that burns things. And that bright light could look like a spaceship up above, but when it comes down in a more focal point. So it's getting into my book that's going to be released, and we'll be talking about that before long, the ETs and the abductions and things of that nature. And I think people will enjoy reading that book. It's got some new stuff in it.
Well, you know, you and I have worked together for a few years now, and the allergies are terrible here.
Yes.
The pollen count, especially olive pollen around here, is insane. So I apologize to the audience for hacking. I don't have a mute button on here that, well, I do, but I didn't use it. Okay. So, but I agree. There's a lot more going on that we don't know.
Right. And this has been the Dave and Ed show. Dave Emmons, Ed Smith, and Universal Digest. Ed is the editor and owner of that newspaper, or edit. How would you call it? It's a.
Technically, I'm the founder.
Right. Yeah. But the UD Universal Digest is a editorial. Would you call it, or?
Oh well, I'm
sure a lot of
writer, so.
And I'm sure a lot of people already know. They've been reading.
I'm blessed with a lot of people that know about it, and they're wonderful.
And also people with DNN, been following DNN Disclosure News.
We wish Rob Adams the very best.
Yeah, Rob is a buddy, a nice guy, and I hope he pulls out of this. And I know he's a really good producer. He does all these little, he's got all these little toys that he plays with, and he does a great job with it. And we have an artist, Olaf, that put this with.
Yes, he's an excellent producer. I'm really impressed with his graphics. So I'll let you close this out here, Dave, buddy.
Okay, well, everybody that listens, don't pay any attention to the little detail slips. Those will be in my book. And also look for the book of the ETs and UFO abductions, My Lifelong History, that's coming out soon through Hangar One Publications, the hijacks, Doug and Alex hijack. So listen to that, and we'll be talking about that soon.
I just might add at the end, too, that Dave and I have broadcast about at least 2 or 3 episodes on Universal Digest and YouTube. So feel free to view those, and it'll be very informative, one of which of his experience with a reptilian is extraordinary, and we did a lot of work on that. Right. So thanks, Dave, buddy. It's great to be back in the...
Thank you, Ed. All righty.
Well, you take care, and God bless everyone in the United States. Thank God the Constitution is still working. They're trying to get around it every way they can, but let's hope that we can make it through this midterm election and get some sanity back in our government.
Bingo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.